Thank you so much for that warm welcome and introduction. Thank you so much, Brenda, for that. Let me just get myself organized here. So good afternoon, folks. I'm so happy to be here in your beautiful city, Vancouver, to join you at your MoveUP convention. I love to be in a room surrounded by people who protect and support fellow workers. And a big part of our team at the CLC are represented by COPE. And we see every day the wonderful work that you do. In fact, I wouldn't be able to say the words that I'm about to say without having one of COPE members take a look at it. I'm proud to be here as Secretary-Treasurer of the Canadian Labour Congress. We represent 3 million workers across the country, but we also represent every worker. And our movement is growing. It is so great to see so many workers coming together, supporting each other, because we're fed up with the status quo and we're demanding better. Right now, we're on a high in the labor movement. By working together, we've won some major victories for workers in just the past few years. Thanks to Jagmeet Singh's approach to the minority parliament, we finally accomplished what we've spent decades advocating for. Just look at what we've achieved: dental care, sustainable jobs, anti-scab and pharmacare. And thanks to the Sustainable Jobs Act, workers will be at the decision-making table as Canada creates new, sustainable jobs in a low-carbon economy. Together, as we ramp up our fight against climate change, we'll make sure that no worker is left behind. And after decades of hard work, we finally made anti-scab law at the federal level. And you know that's a huge deal for us, because over the decades, anti-scab bills were defeated over and over again by a majority of MPs. Many of the MPs who voted for anti-scab law this time have a very long record of voting against it in the past. But this time, thanks to the NDP for making anti-scab a condition of support in Parliament, and of course, thanks to the power of the labor movement, not a single member of the House or Senate dared to vote against it. So let that sink in, because that's how strong we are as a labor movement today. But we still have a lot of work to do, because too many workers and families are still facing impossible choices. There's rising food costs, shelter, gas, and energy bills. And while Big Pharma rakes in huge profits, families struggle to pay for essential medication. Thanks to the cooperation in Parliament, we finally have pharmacare legislation that we are this close to passing. Publicly funded, publicly delivered, universal pharmacare. We've also won massive investments in healthcare, in housing, and in a school lunch program to make sure that our kids don't go to school on an empty stomach. Let me say this clearly: the labor movement has never been as strong and as well respected as we are today. And we're not looking back, we're not going back to the days of government ignoring and disrespecting us ever again. We know that when unions are weakened, we all pay the price. Workers' share of the wealth continues to go down while corporate profits continue to go up. But we have the antidote: the power of collective action, the power of solidarity. That's why everyone suddenly loves labor and wants a piece of us. Seriously, everyone wants to be our friend today. So how do we distinguish between the honest and the hypocritical? How do we separate those paying lip service from those prepared to back workers? With the provincial election just around the corner here in BC, we have to cut through all that noise and look at some of the facts. BC Premier David Eby has achieved many great things for workers in this province. Thanks to your NDP government, BC has the best track record on housing in any province. David Eby is always working to make life more affordable for workers and for all people in this province. And the same cannot be said of Kevin Falcon and John Rustad, because they only care about themselves and they only care about defeating Premier Eby. They don't actually care about the people of British Columbia. They've proven that with the BC United suspending their campaign and throwing their support behind the BC Conservatives. But we always knew that they were cut from the same cloth anyways. Now, these political games, they don't actually help people or solve any of our real problems that we have. Kevin Falcon himself has previously said that John Rustad is too extreme and that he's too big of a risk for British Columbia. Well, I agree with them. And even though they've now joined forces, those facts haven't changed at all. These are two men who only care about winning, not about making a difference for working people. The only way to truly center workers in this province and to ensure that workers and our values is a priority is with a strong NDP provincial government. The BC NDP needs all of you to know to show up for them in this election. So we need to get out and volunteer, knock on doors, donate if you can, and then of course, come election day, make sure you get out and vote. There's too much at stake for us not to get involved in this election. It's vital that we work together to elect politicians who will make life better for everyone. Because while workers and their families are struggling here in BC and across the country, politicians who claim to be fighting on the side of workers are actually working against our best interests. Now, we've heard all of the sloganeering, pro-worker lines that are being road tested. Our ears are ringing with all the colorful rhetoric. The countdown to the next federal election has begun, and political leaders are trying to win our hearts and our votes by evoking the real frustrations that workers feel. But no one knows what's in the best interest of workers better than workers themselves and the unions that represent them. But for years, we've faced governments weakening labor laws, making it harder for unions to organize workers so that they can bargain a better deal from their employer. This has meant a widening wealth gap. Those at the top are doing better and better than ever before, while workers and families are falling further and further behind. Even in the middle of a global pandemic, Conservative governments passed wage restraint laws on essential workers. Conservatives in Alberta did one even better. They launched an all-out assault on workers' rights, tilted things radically in favor of the employers, took away protections to refuse unsafe work. And I just heard about, the earlier discussion about safety in the workplace. Think about that for a minute. Last year in Canada, in 1 year alone, we had 1,081 work-related deaths. That's in 1 year. How dare they weaken protections meant to protect workers and make sure that people get to go home to their families after a workday? These Conservatives have stripped away automatic card check rules. They made joining a union more difficult, but easier for employers, of course, to obstruct workers from organizing. And what did Pierre Poilievre do about this union busting? Does anybody know what he did? Do you know what he said? Zero, exactly. His silence was deafening. Mr. Poilievre talks a really good game, yet he failed to stand up to union-busting gatekeepers like Danielle Smith. And I can tell you why. Because for him to disagree with anti-worker premiers, he'd have to disavow his entire record as a politician. So let's review his record together, just to remind ourselves. Pierre Poilievre has repeatedly attacked union advocates. He voted for back-to-work laws and imposed low-wage settlements on workers, indeed before Alberta's Bill C-32. The last time we saw such brazen union-busting laws in Canada was under Stephen Harper's Conservative government. They passed laws at that time that attacked our ability as unions to operate. And remember who was leading those anti-union laws? It was Pierre Poilievre. proudly boasting about how he wanted to bring union-free workplaces to Canada, proudly saying that he wanted to turn Canada into a right-to-work state. Whatever he claims today, Mr. Poilievre is not our friend. His consistent 20-year record demonstrates that. Tell me, have you ever seen Pierre Poilievre at a picket line? I've seen Jagmeet Singh at many, many picket lines, but never Mr. Poilievre. Has he ever introduced a piece of legislation to strengthen workers' voices? Absolutely not. I've seen Jagmeet Singh in this Parliament use his leverage to get the job done on workers' priorities, while Poilievre was trying to undermine all that progress. Mr. Poilievre sure is fighting hard to make sure that he keeps power for himself, but he's never fought for workers' power ever. And I'm not talking about the distant past. In just our recent history alone, in this last Parliament, in the current Parliament, just over the past year, we fought and won the Sustainable Jobs Act, a bill that secures unions' power in decisions that are being made toward the transition to a low-carbon economy. Pierre Poilievre and his party did everything they could think of to try to slow that bill from passing. They used AI, imagine that, artificial intelligence, to generate over 20,000 random amendments, not to improve the bill, but just to waste as much time as possible. Just utter disrespect, all while many workers are worried about whether they will have a job in 5 years' time. The time wasted by Pierre Poilievre's MPs on the future of good-paying middle-class jobs in Canada was nothing short of shameful. And the bottom line is that they don't actually want to hear that from workers. They want a delay, and they want a social media soundbite. Does that sound like a person who's on our side? It's also taking decades to secure dental care and pharmacare for lowest income workers across the country. And I am so proud to know that 9 million more people in Canada now have access to dental care. And for those of us in the room who have a dental care plan with our employer, understand that these benefits also increase a union's bargaining power. If we don't have to negotiate for dental and drug coverage, we can focus our energy on better wages and other benefits. But not only has Poilievre fought against these benefits, he's already promised to cut them. He's just going to take away these benefits from workers and their families, take money right out of our pockets. Does that sound like a person who's on our side? So yeah, the Conservatives will come to us. They'll tell us sweet nothings in our ear and hope to win us over. They'll tell us how they've changed their ways and they were never going to attack our movement ever again. But sadly, some of us will fall for these sweet nothings. But I'm telling you this, that a leopard can't change its spots. Just look at the Conservative Party policy declaration updated just last year, last September, under the leadership of Pierre Poilievre. On page 6, it says, and I quote, "The Conservative Party of Canada supports right-to-work legislation to allow for optional union membership." And on page 7, it says, "We believe that mandatory union membership and forced financial contributions as a condition of employment limit the economic freedom of Canadians and stifle economic growth." I ask you, does that sound like a person who's on our side? No. So my friends, we must be under no illusion. Workers are having a hard time making ends meet, but they're being shortchanged by billionaire bosses and getting ripped off by grocery CEOs and gas companies. And they want change. That's what we'll fight for. We'll fight for the kind of change that gives workers better pay and more respect. The kind of change that gives them a voice. Change that's good for all workers. So what do we do then? We must fight for what we want, and not settle for what's given us. I know that sometimes it may seem like we have a really tall task. That's why we recently launched Workers Together for a Better Deal. This campaign is led by workers for workers. Workers Together amplifies workers' voices and exposes politicians who do not support us. We'll work to elect candidates at every level who are committed to advocating for workers' rights. And if politicians want our votes, they must respect workers with real action and not just empty promises. We're fighting to make life affordable for everyone. We're pushing politicians to hold greedy corporations to account. We will expose the politicians who don't stand with us. And come election time, we can be sure that we're electing worker-friendly politicians who share our values and who prioritize our concerns at every level of government. You can find the campaign details at workerstogether.ca. And if you're ready, then I want you to do something with me right now. I want you to take out your phone, and I want you to text workers to 55255 to sign up for our campaign. So that's workers, WORKERS, to 55255. Thank you so much. You've taken the first step. Together, we can make our voices heard, we can hold politicians accountable, and push for a future that we deserve. So we're ready to engage workers, mobilize our workplaces, defeat anti-worker politicians at every level, and get more results for working Canadians. But we can only do this if we work together in solidarity, connected by our common goals, and ready to act in unity. So are you ready to fight for workers' rights? Are you ready to build a more equal, inclusive, and just society? Are you ready to never, ever let those in power take us backwards? Me too. My friends, with 3 million workers and 500,000 retirees standing with us, the labor movement is strong, and we are only getting stronger. So let's do this. Solidarity, my friends, and thank you.